Welcome to the Deep Dive. If you are leading a school or a system today, you are almost certainly caught in a fundamental tension. There's the mandate for standardized accountability on one side.
And on the other, this really deep ethical demand for human-centered equity. It's a tough spot.
It really is. And our sources for today, they were developed for a leadership project looking right at this challenge. They tackle it head on.
Yeah, they argue pretty strongly that navigating this kind of tension means we have to abandon, overly simplistic fixes. We need something more transformative. A roadmap, basically, that deliberately connects the formal governance stuff with the realities on the ground.
So our mission here is to synthesize key ideas from the Ontario Leadership Framework, the insights from what's called street data, and core anti-racist strategies.
And bring it all together into, well, a single imperative. Making the pedagogy of voice absolutely central to how we approach instruction. Non-negotiable, really.
Right. This deep dive, think of it as your shortcut to understanding why prioritizing the student experience, their voice, is maybe the only real path to genuine system-level success and well-being today.
We're aiming to give you the context and maybe the conviction to shift from just checking boxes, compliance, towards true transformation.
Okay, so let's start with the foundation, the formal expectations. We have the Ontario Leadership Framework, the OLF, so the province's core document, right?
Yeah.
Gives everyone a common language for leadership.
Exactly. It sets up a structure for professional learning across the whole system. But crucially, it's not just about what leaders do. It's also about who they need to be.
How so?
Well, the OLF points out that effective leadership isn't just technical skill. It actually rests on three kinds of personal leadership resources, or PLRs. First, there's the cognitive side, problem-solving skills, systems thinking, and really knowing what works in schools and classrooms. That's sort of the intellectual horsepower you need.
Okay, that makes sense. But leadership is so much about people, about relationships. What about managing the emotional side of leading change?
That's where the social resources come in. It's about perceiving emotions accurately, managing them in yourself and others, and, well, acting in ways that are emotionally appropriate for the situation.
Right.
But maybe the most critical resources, especially for the tough, adaptive work of equity, are the psychological ones. Optimism, self-efficacy, that belief you can actually make a difference, and resilience.
Resilience feels key.
Absolutely. Equity work is hard, it's often slow. Without those internal reserves, leaders, teachers, they just burn out.
And it's those psychological resources, I guess, that fuel the moral drive behind it all.
Precisely. The sources are very clear on this. The belief system required is that all students can hit high standards given enough time and the right support. High expectations and early help are essential.
When you really internalize that belief, it changes everything about how you look at compliance, doesn't it?
It has to. And in Ontario, this moral purpose isn't just aspirational, it's baked into the law. The Education Act mandates continuous assessment for special education programs.
Which leads to the IEP, the individual education plan, and transition plans, too.
Exactly. And these aren't just bureaucratic hurdles. They're meant to be the mandated pathway towards personalizing learning for students with specific needs.
And that personalization requires teaching that responds to the kids. We see universal design for learning, UDL, and differentiated instruction mentioned a lot.
Yeah, the emphasis is squarely on adapting classroom practices to fit the diverse students we have, not forcing students to fit some rigid preset mold.
That's a crucial distinction.
It really is. Because if the design isn't supportive right from the start, you end up just asking students to cope with a system not built for them. Leaders need to make sure everyone understands the difference between, say, accommodations.
Which give access without changing the learning goal.
Right. Versus modifications, which do change the expectations and have to be tracked carefully on the IEP. Getting that nuance right is fundamental to fairness. Leadership has to ensure that clarity.
Okay, so we've got this legal and ethical push for personalization. But, I mean, if the goal is reaching every student, you have to know where they actually are, right?
Absolutely. And this is where we run into the data challenge. The sources bring in this idea of satellite data.
Satellite data, tell us more.
It's the kind of data we often lean on because it's, well, relatively easy to get. Broad quantitative stuff, provincial test scores like EQ8O, overall attendance numbers, graduation rates.
The view from 30,000 feet.
Exactly. It gives you that wide-angle picture, which can show trends, but it's fundamentally disconnected from the day-to-day reality of the learner in the classroom.
And a big issue, the sources point out is that it's often a lagging indicator. By the time those big test scores land, decisions impacting those kids might have already happened.
Right. And it tends to give people furthest from the classroom, like policymakers, maybe more credibility than they should have, to make really big system-wide decisions without being close to the learning itself.
There's a really striking example in the sources about this disconnect, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a classic data contradiction. A leader might look at the EQAO results and see, say, over 90% of students passing the provincial test. Looks great on paper, right? A good satellite metric.
Sounds good.
But then you look at the report cards, the classroom level assessment, and maybe only 53% of those same students are getting high grades, levels 3 or 4.
Wow, that gap.
Yeah,
That's huge.
that gap is basically screaming evidence that something's misaligned in the system.
So that kind of contradiction, it really demands curiosity, doesn't it? It makes you wonder, maybe the standardized test is just checking for basic competence, while the teachers in the classroom are actually assessing for deeper understanding, for mastery.
Exactly. And if we can't figure out how to close that gap, then we haven't really achieved that moral purpose we talked about. To understand why the gap exists, you have to get closer. You need to move from the satellite view down to the ground level.
Which brings us to the concept of street data.
Yes, street data. The sources describe it as a humanizing, even a decolonizing form of knowledge. It comes directly from interaction, from listening. It centers the actual lived experiences of children, especially those who are often pushed to the margins.
And it values different ways of knowing.
Absolutely. It explicitly honors non-Western ways of knowing, things like spiritual knowledge, social understanding, story-centered knowledge, the kinds of wisdom that traditional metrics completely miss.
Okay, so shifting our focus to street data, this drives what the sources call the equity transformation cycle, or ETC. And they emphasize it's not linear.
No, because real complex change is messy. It's iterative. The ETC model suggests 4 key mindsets drive this cycle. It starts with radical inclusion, which means listen.
Deep listening.
Yeah.
What does that look like in practice?
It's profound, really. It means things like empathy interviews, really trying to understand someone's perspective, and paying intense attention to nonverbal communication. There's this fascinating social science finding mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
That in an emotional exchange, something like 55% of the meaning is conveyed through body language, 38% through tone of voice, and only about 7% through the actual words spoken.
Wow, 7%. So you ignore the nonverbal at your peril as a leader.
Completely. You're missing 93% of the message. So after you've listened deeply to students, parents, community members, especially those whose voices aren't usually heard, then you adopt the mindset of curiosity.
To uncover what's really going on.
Exactly. To collaboratively dig into the data, the stories, and find the root causes of the inequities you're seeing. And this is followed by creativity to reimagine how things could be different.
And finally, courage to actually move and make those changes happen.
Right. And that idea of radical inclusion, it should absolutely extend to professional learning, too. The sources really push leaders to bring students and parents into things like equity learning walks or instructional rounds as actual colleagues.
As colleagues, that's powerful.
It is. Because if you genuinely want the clearest possible view of those subtle micro interactions, the little moments that can reinforce inequity, you need those perspectives in the room. They see things educators might miss.
Okay, so we've laid out the ethical foundation with the OLF.
Yeah.
And this human-centered data approach through street data. It feels like this synthesis points directly towards a necessary shift in the classroom itself, towards what the sources call the pedagogy of voice. Why is this specific instructional model presented as so central, so non-negotiable?
Because fundamentally, it's the how. It's the practical mechanism for actually achieving the equity goals that street data helps us uncover.
Yeah.
Pedagogy of voice sits right at the intersection of critical pedagogy, which is about challenging the status quo, especially around power, and culturally responsive education, which centers students' identities and backgrounds. It's about fundamentally shifting the locus of power, the locus of learning, to the student, giving them voice.
And it's positioned as an active replacement for something else.
Yeah.
The pedagogy of compliance.
Exactly. Which, let's be honest, is still pretty pervasive, that looks like.
Yeah.
Teacher at the front lecturing, students passive in rows, the teacher doing most of the thinking, carrying the cognitive load, and the main focus being on control, on getting the right output.
Rather than on genuine learning and student agency.
Precisely. Pedagogy of voice aims to foster healing, cognitive growth, and that crucial sense of agency. And agency itself becomes the new metric for success. It goes way beyond just mastering content.
So how do we measure agency? What are the components?
The sources break it down into three key things. Identity, meaning the student feels like their ways of being, their ways of learning, their ways of knowing are actually seen and valued in the classroom. Then, belonging, that feeling of being truly seen, maybe even loved, accepted within that learning community. And finally, efficacy, having real opportunities to make a difference, to have an impact maybe in the classroom or the wider school.
Identity, belonging, efficacy. That really reframes the purpose of the classroom, making it potentially the most powerful lever for system change we have.
It absolutely is.
So how do leaders help teachers make this shift? It sounds like a big theoretical jump. Do the sources offer practical steps?
They do. They lay out 6 really powerful, yet quite simple, actionable rules for transforming instruction. Things teachers and leaders can actually use.
Like what?
Well, simple stuff like talk less, smile more, and questions over answers that immediately shifts the thinking work back to the learner.
Right, getting students to do the cognitive heavy lifting.
Exactly. And then there are more structural changes suggested, like ritualize reflection and revision, making thinking visible and iterative, and make learning public.
Public how? Like presentations.
Yeah, it could be defenses of learning, exhibitions, panels. It changes who the audience is, raises the stakes in a meaningful way.
Okay. What else?
Circle up. Physically changing the space transforms power dynamics instantly. Gets you away from that traditional front-of-the-room lecture setup.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And the last one. I recall it being potentially the most challenging for systems built on traditional grading.
Ah, yes. Feedback over grades. This one is huge. The sources argue it's key to breaking the, quote, stranglehold that grading has over genuine learning.
So the focus shifts entirely.
The focus shifts. When the primary task becomes giving regular, specific, descriptive feedback that helps students grow, the sorting and ranking function of the grade starts to fade into the background. The whole system begins to reorient around supporting mastery, not just evaluating performance at one point in time.
There's that powerful example mentioned from the June Jordan School for Equity, right? With their performance assessment.
Yes, students there had to publicly defend their learning to graduate. High stakes.
But what really stands out in that example is the underlying commitment.
It's the system's response. Failure wasn't the end point. If a student didn't succeed in their defense, they didn't get a failing grade and move on or drop out. They had to go back, revise, get more support, and try again.
Until they demonstrated mastery.
Until mastery. That shows a profound, foundational commitment to actually supporting every single learner, no matter how long it takes. That's what feedback over grades, taken seriously, can lead to.
Implementing a pedagogy of voice system-wide, that clearly requires a massive shift, not just in teaching practices, but in adult mindsets too. This is where anti-racist strategies become absolutely critical, right? Leaders have to confront systemic bias directly.
Non-negotiable. Leaders themselves need to embody what the sources call the warm demander framework. It's this combination of holding genuinely high expectations for students, yes, but also for colleagues, and simultaneously convincing them, showing unwavering belief in their capacity to meet those expectations, to grow.
High expectations and high support, essentially.
Exactly. And you use that street data, those ground-level insights, to call people into the work and call them up to their potential. It's about ensuring accountability is rooted in support, belief, and shared learning, not in shame or punitive measures.
How does a leader do that authentically? So it doesn't just feel like, compliance wrapped in nicer language or even authoritarian.
That requires real vigilance against what the sources call equity traps and tropes. You have to actively avoid just doing equity, treating it like a set of tools, a checklist, something to be managed.
Right, the superficial approach.
Or siloing equity, making it the job of one specific person or department. Equity has to be everyone's work. It must be a whole system commitment, woven into the fabric of how everyone learns and improves. And that's linked to building adaptive expertise.
Adaptive expertise.
Yeah.
As opposed to just routine expertise.
Correct. Routine expertise is about following procedures, mastering the known steps. Important, but not enough for the challenges we face. Adaptive expertise is needed for complex, messy, unpredictable problems, the kind equity work always involves. It demands constant learning, responsiveness, and adjustment.
So how do we build that collective adaptive muscle across a school or system?
The sources point to 2 key practices. Collaborative inquiry, which involves structured cycles where professionals work together on genuine shared problems of practice using data and evidence.
Okay.
And public learning. This means making teaching practice, student work, and even teacher dilemmas visible. Centering those dilemmas and bringing student voice into the conversation allows everyone to think through the really tough challenges together, publicly, vulnerably.
That vulnerability seems key to building trust for adaptive work.
It's essential. Now, layered onto all of this is the increasing role of technology, especially AI. We see it integrating everywhere: adaptive learning platforms, writing tools like TextBuddy, even platforms like IA Create, aimed at supporting inclusion and IEP development.
So technology offers potential support for personalization and maybe efficiency.
Potential, yes. But its integration brings huge responsibilities for leaders. The sources stress the need for critical judgment, and they argue that every educator now needs AI literacy.
Meaning,
Basically, the knowledge and skills to understand what AI is, how it works, and how to evaluate and use these tools safely, effectively, and this is crucial ethically.
and this ties straight back to data ethics and legal obligations, particularly with sensitive student information in special education.
Absolutely. The sources explicitly underscore how vital it is to uphold privacy legislation like the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, MPEPA, and the Personal Health Information Protection Act, PHPA.
Because things like IEPs, health assessments, details about specific needs, that's not just data, it's personal health information under the law.
Exactly. So leaders have an absolute duty to ensure that even if AI tools are used to assist with drafting plans or suggesting pathways, human oversight, human judgment remains the final non-negotiable gatekeeper. We must ensure privacy is protected, the data is accurate, and the decisions serve the student ethically.
We can't let technology automate away our core ethical duties.
Now for a second, that human layer of judgment is paramount. Hashtag tag tag outro.
So what we've tried to do in this deep dive is synthesize a pathway for transforming complex educational systems, specifically looking through the lens of the Ontario context, but with relevance everywhere.
It really requires aligning those formal leadership expectations from the OLF with the courageous, humanizing insights we get from street data.
And showing how that synthesis inevitably leads to the pedagogy of voice as the core, non-negotiable instructional approach needed for real equity.
Yeah, the challenge for you as a leader listening to this is really to move beyond the relative comfort of tracking simple metrics, the satellite view, and embrace the messier, adaptive, sometimes difficult work of truly centering student identity, student voice, and healing within your schools and systems.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. We've acknowledged that AI tools can increasingly automate assessment, generate personalized learning pathways, maybe even draft significant parts of an IEP efficiently.
Technology is mastering many of the transactional parts of education, no doubt.
So if that's the case, what then remains the uniquely human, the non-substitutable, absolutely essential role of the leader, the teacher, and even the student in this evolving landscape?
Maybe it comes back full circle to those personal leadership resources we started with, particularly the psychological ones: optimism, resilience, self-efficacy. Is it the cultivation of those qualities, the hope, the belief, the perseverance, that technology simply cannot measure, cannot script, and certainly cannot substitute?
That human touch, that ethical judgment, that ability to foster genuine connection and agency.
That's perhaps the final highest form of adaptive leadership, ensuring equity truly thrives, driven by human wisdom and care. That's the knowledge we hope you take away and reflect on from this deep dive.